Have you ever felt that weight on your chest when you wake up? That strange perception that everything around you has lost its meaning, as if people walk around like ghosts trapped in empty routines? If you're here, maybe you've spent sleepless nights thinking, is there a way out? There is. And it's older than you imagine. For centuries, sensitive men have discovered that sometimes the only way to find peace is to take a step back. This isn't cowardice. It's wisdom. It's realizing that not every battle is worth fighting, and that, often, the greatest act of courage is choosing silence. This isn't an invitation to run away from life, but a map to find a life that's truly worth living. In the 14th century, Eustache Deschamps wrote something that could be about our times. Time of suffering and temptation, age of tears, envy and torment. Time of languor and damnation, lesser age, near the end of times. Don't you feel like he was describing exactly what we live today? The sensation that something essential has broken? That values have been inverted? What should be sacred has become a commodity? And what should unite people only divides them? It was faced with something similar that Lao Tzu, the Chinese sage, made a decision that would change the history of philosophy. Tired of the corruption and hypocrisy of his time, he decided to leave. Legend says he climbed on his buffalo and headed to the western mountains, leaving behind his position as librarian of the imperial court. Before disappearing, he wrote one of the most profound books about existence, the Tao Te Ching. Lao Tzu wasn't running away from reality. He simply refused to participate in a farce. He observed leaders more concerned with power than wisdom, and a society that had lost contact with the essential. His departure was an act of integrity. He chose to preserve his soul instead of selling it to social convenience. By becoming a hermit, he showed that sometimes abandoning society is the only way to live according to our deepest values. Now, imagine the courage of that decision. Lao Tzu had comfort, social respect, and material security. Still, something inside him screamed that none of that was worth it if he had to betray himself every single day. How many of us don't face this dilemma? How many wake up daily with the feeling that they're living someone else's life? Throughout history, there have always been individuals like this. People who felt, deep down, that there was something wrong with the way the world works. People who preferred the silence of solitude to the noise of crowds, who distanced themselves from others only to get closer to themselves. This impulse isn't modern. It's ancestral, almost instinctive. It's as if some souls carried within them a silent calling for isolation, for contemplation, for a simpler and truer life. It's not hatred for humanity. Most of the time, it's the opposite. A love so deep that it can't bear to see humanity destroying itself. It's like watching someone you love drowning and realizing that if you try to save them the wrong way, you'll both sink together. This impulse manifests in different cultures and eras, as a natural response when social life becomes suffocating. In ancient Greece, Diogenes lived like a dog, rejecting conventions. In India, princes abandoned palaces to seek spiritual enlightenment. In Tibet, monks isolated themselves in caves in the world's highest mountains. But why do some people feel this calling so deeply? What does solitary life offer that society cannot? And is it possible to be a hermit nowadays, when everything pushes us towards superficial connections, noise, and rush? These questions deserve honest answers. Perhaps the key lies in the difference between solitude and isolation, between choosing to be alone and being forced to be alone. In ancient India, ascetics already existed, men and women who abandoned everything to live in the forests, seeking truth through silence and meditation. The Upanishads, sacred texts over 3,000 years old, speak of these sages who found God not in temples full of people, but in the deep solitude of nature. They discovered that when you remove all external distractions and stop trying to impress others, something extraordinary happens. You finally find who you really are. These ascetics developed practices we now call meditation, but for them it wasn't a technique. It was a way of living. They learned to listen to silence, to observe thoughts without identifying with them, and to find peace even when the mind was restless. What they discovered is profound. True happiness doesn't come from outside, nor from the things we possess or others' approval. It's born from within, from a sincere connection with who we really are and with something greater than ourselves. In early Christianity, the desert fathers and mothers emerged. St. Paul of Thebes was one of the first. He fled to the Egyptian desert to escape persecution by Emperor Decius. But there, far from everything, he found a peace he had never known. He lived over 90 years in the desert, and people traveled for days just to hear his few words, born from silence. Amma Syncletica, one of the desert mothers, said something almost unthinkable today. It is better to be wounded among many than to be honored in solitude. And yet, she chose solitude because she knew that there she could exist fully, without masks, without pretense, without having to justify her own life. She discovered that solitude isn't a punishment, but a gift, the chance to simply be who you are. These Christian hermits cultivated what they called vigilance of the heart, the practice of observing thoughts and emotions without judgment, recognizing when something came from the ego or from a deeper layer. They realized that much of human suffering is born from resistance to what is, from the constant desire for things to be different. In China, especially in the Zhongnan Mountains, a culture of hermits formed that persists to this day. Poets, sages, and philosophers climbed the mountains to live in simple cabins, growing their own food, drinking spring water, and contemplating the stars. For them, life wasn't deprivation, but abundance of time, silence, inner peace. They knew that fewer things could mean more life, and that external simplicity could generate invaluable internal wealth. Li Bai, one of China's greatest poets, lived long periods as a hermit. His poems about mountains and silence have an almost mystical beauty. He spoke of conversations with the moon, the wisdom of stones, the wind that carries messages that only those in silence can hear. For him, nature wasn't just scenery. It was a companion, a teacher, and the reflection of the soul. Even in the modern West, thinkers like Henry David Thoreau drew from this ancestral tradition. Thoreau spent 2 years alone on the shores of Walden Pond, in a cabin he built himself, and declared that he learned more about life there than in decades in the city. He discovered that when you eliminate the superfluous, unnecessary possessions, empty social obligations, the obsession with approval, there's room left for what really matters. Deep thought, connection with yourself, and sincere appreciation of the beauty around you. In the 20th century, Thomas Merton, a Trappist monk, chose a life of almost complete silence and wrote some of the most profound spiritual works ever created. He said that silence isn't the absence of sound, but the presence of something greater, a special attention, a way of being in the world that allows you to hear what modern noise prevents us from perceiving. But what leads someone to a decision as radical as abandoning social life? Motivations vary, but some repeat throughout history. The Taoist hermits of China, for example, sought to reconnect with the Tao, the natural flow of existence, impossible to feel in the midst of social chaos. For them, society was like a polluted river. The more you drank from it, the sicker you became. They realized that rules, expectations, and even everyday conversations distance us from who we really are. Imagine living in a world that demands a different mask for each situation. One for work, another for family, another for friends. Gradually, you lose yourself among so many personas. For Taoists, rediscovering the original face was only possible by stepping away from this game of roles. In solitude, you can be just yourself. The Desert Fathers had another powerful motivation, escaping the corruption that contaminated even religion itself. When the church became a political institution full of worldly interests, faith lost its spiritual purity. They decided that to maintain connection with the sacred, they had to distance themselves. It wasn't hatred for humanity, but self-protection. This feeling resonates today. How many institutions that should elevate us end up corrupting us? How many organizations that promise noble values promote only their own interests? How many times have you left spiritually exhausted from environments that should have strengthened you? Lao Tzu felt something similar to what many of us feel today. Dissatisfaction grew in his chest like an impossible-to-uproot weed. Each day at the imperial court made him feel he was betraying himself. Politics, power games, falsehood, pretense. All of this drained his soul, drop by drop. Renouncing society was the way he found to preserve what was most true in him, an act of spiritual self-preservation. He knew that if he remained, he would end up being absorbed by that system. And you? Don't you sometimes feel something similar? That need to step away to maintain your integrity? to not become just another puppet of the system? This isn't weakness, it's a sign of spiritual health. It means your soul is still alive, that it still reacts when forced to go against its essence. Look around as if you were a stranger observing a strange culture. Corruption at all levels, from small schemes to billion-dollar scandals. Political polarization that turns friends into enemies and divides families. Greed disguised as entrepreneurship or economic growth. Power concentrated in the hands of a few, while millions carry the weight of inequality and are convinced that it's their own fault, as if they hadn't worked hard enough. Social networks have transformed human dialogue into a spectacle of vanity and hostility, where nuance died and only shouting remained. News, broadcast 24 hours a day, bombard the mind with tragedies you can't solve, problems you can't control, but that nonetheless suck your energy and leave you anxious, depressed, and powerless. And underneath all this exists a deep feeling that something essential has been lost. As if humanity had made a silent pact with its own destruction, and now everyone pretends it was a good idea. As if everyone knew there's something fundamentally wrong, but no one dares to be the first to say it out loud. How many times have you thought, I don't want to be part of this anymore? How many times have you woken up with a heavy heart, feeling like your soul begs for a space where it can breathe, away from this madness we call normality? How many times have you caught yourself dreaming of a simpler, more honest life connected with what really matters? If you feel this, know that you're not alone. This feeling is more common than you imagine. Only few have the courage to admit it, even to themselves. It's as if certain souls were naturally allergic to the artificiality of the modern world. It's not a matter of thinking you're better than others, but of being different. You carry a sensitivity that many have lost or perhaps never developed. And this sensitivity, however much it sometimes seems like a curse, is a rare and precious gift. Renunciation of society has always been a silent form of resistance. When systems become too toxic, when participating in them means giving up your own essence, when every choice seems to force you to betray your values, hermetism stops being escape and becomes a revolutionary act. It's a firm no to a world that insists on molding you into something you never wanted to be. It's a refusal to play a game where the rules are already corrupted and the winners are always the same. It's the choice to preserve your humanity instead of sacrificing it on the altar of distorted progress or an idea of success imposed by external standards. But there's an intriguing paradox. Why do we seek so much advice from those who abandon society? Why do the writings of Lao Tzu, Thoreau, and Thomas Merton continue to inspire generations centuries later? Why, when someone truly manages to disconnect from the world's noise, does everyone want to hear what that person has to say? Think about it. Lao Tzu wrote the Tao Te Ching as a farewell gesture to a simple border guard, without imagining that those pages would become one of humanity's most influential books. Thoreau, when recording his 2 years at Walden, had no intention of being read by millions. The Desert Fathers spoke only to the few who sought them, and even so, their words echo to this day. Perhaps this happens because those who step away can see the world with clarity. It's like climbing a mountain. The higher you go, the better you see the horizon. The hermit doesn't flee from reality, he gains perspective on it. And this perspective becomes valuable precisely because it's rare. Most people are so immersed in routine, so trapped in the flow of demands, that they lose the ability to see the whole. When you're in the middle of the crowd, it's easy to be carried by the current, to believe that everything has to be this way, because it always has been. But when you distance yourself, you realize that many things considered normal are just fragile, imposed, and temporary conventions. Many problems that seem unsolvable actually only exist because we accept rules that could be different. The hermit brings something unique, an external voice, free from the pressures and interests of the system. That's why in history, prophets always came from the desert, and sages always descended from mountains. Not because these places are magical, but because those who live in them learn to see in ways that are impossible to see in the midst of social chaos. Solitude offers something that social life can never give: true time. Time to think, feel, observe, breathe. Time to reconnect with yourself without external interference. It's as if the soul, suffocated by the emotional pollution of the world, could finally breathe. You begin to hear a voice that was always there, your own, hidden under the noise of all the others. Christopher Knight, known as the North Pond Hermit, lived 27 years alone in a Maine forest, surviving with minimal thefts from unoccupied vacation homes. When he was captured, journalists rushed to interview him, fascinated by the idea of someone surviving so long in absolute silence. One of his phrases sums it all up. Silence was like a physical presence. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was the presence of peace. Knight developed an intimate relationship with the forest. He knew how to recognize every change in seasons, every night sound, every movement of the wind. His mind slowed down so much that he stopped thinking in words. His thoughts became images, sensations, intuitions. He had rediscovered a purer form of consciousness, something ancestral, that is lost in the noise of life and society. When you step away from noise, others' opinions, cultural expectations, the obligation to explain yourself all the time, you create space for your spiritual and creative life to flourish. It's like cleaning a garden full of weeds. Suddenly, the flowers and plants you really want to cultivate find space to grow. Arthur Schopenhauer, the German philosopher, said, "Solitude is the fate of all exceptional spirits. Not from arrogance or superiority, but because certain minds only function well in silence. Just as a rare instrument only reveals itself when the entire orchestra falls silent, certain qualities of the soul only emerge when there's internal space." Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the harshest critics of modern society, constantly sought periods of isolation in the Swiss mountains. He would walk for hours, reflecting, writing, facing his own shadows. It was in this state of introspection that his most daring and revolutionary ideas were born. For him, solitude wasn't the absence of company, but abundance of oneself. It was the chance to be face to face with your own essence, stripped of all social masks. Nietzsche also said that most people flee from being alone because they fear they won't like their own company. But when you learn to be self-sufficient, you discover a source of strength and freedom that no system can control. Nietzsche said that most people fear solitude because they're afraid of discovering they don't like their own company. But those who learn to remain with themselves find a source of strength and creativity that doesn't depend on the external world. When you approach the hermetic life, whether physically or spiritually, something begins to change in your perception. You discover a simple truth that consumer society does everything to hide. Everything is temporary. That uncontrollable desire for clothing, the obsession with social status, anger over a political discussion, or the weight of family drama, all of this dissolves with time, like clouds pushed by the wind. This understanding of impermanence isn't depressing, as many imagine. It's deeply liberating. When you realize that nothing lasts forever, attachment loses strength. You stop giving so much weight to small daily tragedies. You learn to laugh at situations that once consumed you, because you understand they're just passing points in life's flow. Rolf Dobelli, in the book Stop Reading the News, explains how our minds are being drowned by useless information. He compares this to trying to drink water from a fire hose. The impact doesn't quench thirst, it just drowns you. The hermit understands this intuitively, knows that less information, but of greater depth, is worth more than the excess of superficial noise. By stopping compulsively consuming news, social media, or others' dramas, you discover something curious. Your life doesn't get worse. It gets better. You feel more mental energy to focus on what you can actually change. You gain internal space to reflect, create, cultivate true relationships, and grow as a person. Social and emotional distance works like a magnifying lens for life. You begin to see patterns that were previously invisible. You realize that much of what we call urgent is just an illusion created to keep people distracted. When you step away from the whirlwind, you understand that many of the battles that consume humanity are the same as thousands of years ago. Fear, greed, desire for power, need to belong. But is it possible to be a hermit nowadays? We live in a hyper-connected world, where every movement leaves digital traces. Modern life requires a social security number, a bank account, proof of address, and even a simple piece of land requires bureaucracy. Classical hermetism, disappearing into the mountains and never returning, has become almost impossible legally. Still, there's a way out. Modern hermetism isn't about disappearing, but about creating invisible barriers. It's learning to be in the world without being swallowed by it. Maybe this means living in a quieter place, reducing toxic social interactions, stopping intoxicating yourself with the incessant flow of news and opinions. Maybe it simply means choosing a lighter life, with fewer objects and more mental space. There's a Chinese proverb that says, "The mediocre hermit lives in the forest, the great hermit lives in the city." True mastery isn't about isolating yourself geographically, but maintaining internal silence even surrounded by crowds. It's walking down a crowded street, feeling as peaceful as someone walking alone on a mountain. The urban hermit is one who creates a sacred space within himself. He can live in the middle of the city, but doesn't let himself be drained by it. He observes, interacts when needed, but keeps his inner peace intact. This is a skill developed with practice, learning to silence the mind even in chaotic environments, not absorbing toxic energies, creating internal rituals that keep you centered. Technology, curiously, has facilitated this life. Remote work eliminated much of the artificial interactions of the office. Online shopping avoids exposure to commercial environments programmed to manipulate you. Streaming, digital books, and online courses allow you to have access to everything without leaving your refuge. This doesn't mean becoming a social recluse. It means having the power to choose. You interact with the world when you want, not because you're being dragged by it. You frequent places out of genuine interest, not social obligation. Another expression of modern hermetism is digital nomadism. Living, traveling, alternating countries and cultures can give you something the traditional hermit also seeks: anonymity and freedom. In another country, local tensions don't affect you. You observe society from the outside, like a curious foreigner, without the pressure to get involved. Traveling teaches something transformative. The truths we consider absolute are just conventions. What's normal here can be absurd somewhere else, and vice versa. This relativistic perception frees you because it shows you that much of what we call reality is just a fragile collective construction. But not everyone was born for solitary life. Isolation requires healthy motivations, not emotional escape. If you distance yourself because you hate people, because you're full of resentment, you risk transforming your solitude into prison. Many isolate themselves physically, but remain mentally trapped to crowds, ruminating grudges and injustices. Abba Arsenius, one of the Desert Fathers, said, "It's better to live among people maintaining internal solitude than to live alone with your heart trapped to the crowd." The true hermit doesn't seek isolation to feed anger or prove superiority. He distances himself because he desires peace, not because he despises others. He understands that not everyone can or should follow the same path. Compassion remains present. He just knows his journey is different. The hermit's path is ancient, but its lessons remain alive, even amid the deafening noise of the modern world. Not everyone needs to climb a mountain, abandon everything, or disappear from society to find peace. Sometimes the true act of courage is in making silence in the midst of chaos, in refusing collective hysteria, unrestrained consumption, and social roles that suffocate who you truly are. The hermit's wisdom isn't about physical isolation, but about an inner reconnection. It's about a return to the essential, a life with less noise, less rush, less distractions, and more meaning, more lucidity, more presence. If there exists within you a calling for this, for silence, for authenticity, for a more intimate and less staged existence, don't ignore this feeling. It's not weakness, escape, or laziness. It's a sign that your soul is still alive and is trying to remind you of something the world taught you to forget. That there's a difference between living and just functioning. But it's not about following this calling blindly. Examine your motivations. Ask yourself if you're seeking clarity or just trying to escape pain. True solitude is medicine, not escape. And it only heals when lived with consciousness. Because in the end, true solitude isn't the absence of people. It's the presence of yourself. It's the ability to sit in silence with your own soul, without needing applause, distractions, or validation. And this presence, this communion with yourself, can begin now. No matter where you are, how many people surround you, or what your routine is. Just close your eyes, take a deep breath, and find that place inside you that was never touched by the chaos outside. It was always there, waiting for you to stop looking in the wrong places and finally come home. Not a physical home, but the inner home, which is yourself. And if you felt that these words spoke to you, not to your mask, but to what exists behind it, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like on this video. not out of vanity nor for numbers, but because this allows me to continue creating content for people like you, who feel too much, think too much, question too much, and therefore suffer in silence in a world that's too shallow. You're not alone. There are other walkers on this solitary road. And even if they don't recognize each other in society's noisy halls, they recognize each other here, in this space of reflection, from soul to soul. Whenever you need to remember this, I'll be here. Because some paths aren't made for crowds. But these are the paths that lead furthest.